The galaxy was vast, and humanity was still a fledgling species, struggling to reach beyond its cradle. For centuries, Earth had been confined to its small corner of the cosmos, its ambitions limited by the slow crawl of technology and the vast distances between stars. Yet, in the depths of hidden laboratories and military installations, something had changed. It was a breakthrough that defied every known law of physics, an achievement that would catapult humanity into the ranks of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. It had begun as a scientific dream, an exploration of the uncharted boundaries of space-time. But the implications were far greater than anyone could have predicted. The Phoenix engine was humanity's first true weapon of galactic significance, a marvel of science that bent the very fabric of space-time. The engineers who had worked on the project were aware of the risks, the potential consequences of tampering with the fundamental laws of the universe. But they were driven by an unyielding desire to push beyond the impossible. And they had succeeded. In the blink of an eye, they had created the first engine capable of faster-than-light travel, but their creation had consequences no one had anticipated. The new fleet that was about to emerge from Earth's shadow would be more than just a force of exploration. It would be a force of domination. The first test flight was a momentous occasion. The Horizon, Earth's flagship, was a colossal ship designed to carry the Phoenix engine to the very edges of space. It was a gleaming testament to human engineering, a marvel of design, its sleek hull cutting through the void of space with an elegance that belied its immense power. On the bridge of the Horizon, Admiral Jackson Hale stood with a calmness that betrayed the enormity of the moment. His crew moved in practiced synchrony around him, their eyes fixed on the holographic interfaces that filled the room. The countdown had begun, and all eyes were on the Star Cruiser. "Engines primed, all systems go, Admiral," Commander Lila Hayes reported from the operations console, her voice steady despite the tension that hung in the air. Hale nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his face. "Initiate the jump," he said. The crew fell silent, awaiting the final step in their journey to redefine humanity's place in the galaxy. With a hum that reverberated through the ship, the Phoenix engine activated. The ship's hull shimmered, the space around it warping as the engine tore a hole in the fabric of spacetime. A pulse of energy shot out from the horizon, and in an instant, the ship was gone. The Horizon did not simply travel faster than light. It disappeared from one point in the universe and reappeared at a distant location, bypassing the barriers of time and space as though they were mere suggestions. Over 100 light-years away, in an uncharted sector of the galaxy, the Horizon materialized, its arrival marked by the sudden shift of local gravitational fields. The crew stood in awe, staring at the view screen as the stars in front of them twisted and swirled. "We did it," Hayes breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." Hale's face was grim, his thoughts racing. "We've done more than that," he murmured, gazing out into the vastness of space. "We've changed everything." The first test flight was a success beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The Phoenix engine was flawless, and the implications of its use were immediately apparent. Humanity had, in a moment of reckless brilliance, shattered the boundaries of what was thought possible. But the galaxy would not be so forgiving. The Horizon had not just traveled to the distant stars. It had signaled the arrival of a new player in the galactic theater, a player whose very existence threatened to upend the fragile balance of power that had been carefully maintained for millennia. As the news of the successful test spread across Earth, the responses were varied. Among humanity, there was excitement, fear, and a sense of unprecedented hope. But out in the galaxy, the reactions were less enthusiastic. For eons, the great civilizations of the galaxy had ruled over vast swathes of space. The Sirians, the Zygoths, and the Vrygoths. Ancient, powerful species had watched as lesser races scurried beneath them, taking only what was granted and never challenging the status quo. Now, for the first time in millennia, a species had arrived that threatened to break that order, and none of them were prepared for what came next. The Sirians, beings of energy and pure intellect, had been the first to notice the anomaly. The Phoenix engine did not simply bend space, it bent time. It altered the fundamental relationship between space and energy, a disturbance that sent ripples through the universe. The Sirians, who had long prided themselves on their mastery over the forces of nature, could not ignore the implications. They had never anticipated a species with the audacity to alter the laws of physics to such an extent. To them, the galaxy was a carefully constructed balance, and humanity's sudden, reckless advance threatened everything they had built. "We must intervene," Supreme Sirian Counselor Yatar said, his glowing form pulsing with disquiet. The council room was filled with the presence of the ancient energy beings, their forms drifting in the air, surrounded by swirling currents of light. "This species is too dangerous. We cannot allow them to upset the equilibrium of the galaxy." A second voice, one of the counselors known as Zernak, spoke up. "Their technology is not yet refined, but the potential for destruction is immense. We must act before their fleet becomes a true threat." The Sirians knew that they had to move quickly. Their influence was vast, and their power, unimaginable by human standards, gave them the ability to strike swiftly and decisively. They set their plans into motion, their fleet assembling in the hidden corners of the galaxy. But the Sirians were not the only ones watching. In the core of the galaxy, the Zygoth Collective had been following the developments with growing unease. The Zygoths were a race of hive-minded beings who had long believed in their own superiority, a species that had absorbed countless others into their collective consciousness. To them, humanity's emergence was an affront to their vision of the galaxy, an unchecked species that had not been granted the wisdom to wield such power. "They break the laws of nature," Zygoth Prime said, his multi-limbed form clicking as he gave orders to his subordinates. "They will not be allowed to grow unchecked. We must strike before they become too powerful." The Zygoths saw humanity's breakthrough as an existential threat. They had been the architects of the galaxy's hierarchy, guiding the flow of power and resources. Now, they would have to eliminate this new competitor before it could upset their dominance. The third major player in the galaxy, the Vrikas, a race of insectoid beings known for their once peaceful nature, had been forced to adapt to the changing tides of galactic politics. For centuries, they had maintained an alliance with the other races, keeping to their corner of the galaxy. But the rise of humanity threatened that stability. The Vrikas could no longer stand by and watch as another species rose to prominence. Their own fleet was mobilized, vast ships filled with countless warriors who would protect their way of life at all costs. And so, the three powers, the Sirians, the Zygoths, and the Vrikas, began to prepare for war. They knew that the rise of Earth's physics-breaking fleet was a challenge that could not be ignored. It was only a matter of time before the first shots were fired. And when they came, they would not just be a threat to Earth. They would be a threat to everything humanity had worked for. Back on Earth, the fleet continued to grow. The Horizon had returned from its test flight, but it was not alone. More ships were being constructed, each more powerful than the last. Humanity's military had been given the green light to accelerate production. The Phoenix engine was incorporated into every new vessel, and the fleet began to expand outward. But as each new ship was launched, the feeling of impending conflict grew stronger. The galaxy's great powers had not remained passive. Humanity's sudden rise to prominence was not a blessing. It was a challenge, one that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Admiral Hale stood at the command center of the Eclipse, the flagship of the newly formed fleet. He had watched as humanity had taken its first steps into the greater cosmos. Now, as the ships prepared to leave Earth's orbit and explore the galaxy, Hale couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a storm. The fleet was ready for anything, or so he thought. The unknown forces that were coming for them, however, were not going to be easy to face. "Admiral, we're ready for launch," Commander Hayes said, her voice cutting through Hale's thoughts. "The fleet is in position. The first jump is scheduled." Hale nodded grimly. "Initiate the jump. Let's see what the galaxy has in store for us." As the ship surged forward, the first jump into the unknown, the first real step into galactic space, they left behind the only place they had ever known. But what lay ahead would test them in ways they could never have imagined. The galaxy's nightmare had already begun, and it would not be long before humanity learned just how fragile its place in the stars truly was. And countless. The eclipse surged ahead, its engines thrumming in perfect synchrony as it cut through the dark void of space. Admiral Hale stood at the front of the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the vast emptiness beyond the ship's viewports. His thoughts were far from the normal worries of ship mechanics or mission logistics. Instead, his mind was weighed down by the looming shadows of humanity's new place in the universe. The fleet, with the eclipse at its head, was Earth's first true force of galactic reach. Behind them were ships that glinted in the void, gleaming vessels built with the Phoenix engine at their cores. The Phoenix engine had shattered all known laws of physics and allowed humanity to bend space-time to its will. Ships could now travel light years in a matter of moments, bypassing the limitations of traditional travel. The power of this breakthrough had brought with it a wave of optimism and pride for humanity. But it had also brought with it danger. There were powers in the galaxy that would not allow this sudden rise to go unchecked. The Syrians, the Zygoths, and the Vrikas each had their own agendas, their own fears about what the existence of humanity's faster-than-light fleet might mean for their influence and control over the galaxy. They had watched from the shadows, and now they were ready to act. "Admiral, the fleet is ready to make the jump," Commander Lila Hayes's voice broke through Hale's musings. She stood by the tactical station, her fingers dancing across the holographic interfaces with practiced ease. Her eyes were focused, but Hale could see the tension beneath her calm exterior. "Understood," Hale replied, his voice steady. "Initiate jump sequence. Let's see how far we can push this." The countdown began. It was a moment that felt timeless, as the ship's systems hummed with the promise of something far greater than anything humanity had ever imagined. They had only scratched the surface of the potential the Phoenix engine offered, and with each jump, they would stretch that surface further, pushing the boundaries of the known universe. "Wolfman Survivor enters the forum," he said in his headset, bouncing up and down like a python. Outside the eclipse, space twisted and curled, stars bending into strange shapes as the ship's engines kicked into high gear. It was a feeling that was both exhilarating and disorienting. The vast distance between Earth and the calor expanse, their designated destination, was rendered meaningless in a single heartbeat. Within moments, they would be there. The ship vanished from its current position, its form blinking out of existence like a mirage. A brief, intense pulse of energy surged through the ship, rattling it slightly, as the laws of space-time were briefly bent to their breaking point. And then, just as quickly as it had left, the eclipse reappeared. The stars outside the windows were no longer familiar. The planet that appeared on the view screen was nothing like Earth, but it was no less captivating. Its surface cracked and barren, a world awaiting exploration. "We're here," Hayes announced, her voice carrying a note of awe that Hale couldn't ignore. He let out a breath, but it wasn't one of relief. There was no time for relief. Not with the looming unknowns ahead. With each jump, they had come closer to discovering the limits of the Phoenix engine. But it wasn't just the science that concerned him now. It was the forces that were closing in on them, forces that did not tolerate sudden ascensions of power. "Prepare for orbital insertion. Signal the rest of the fleet," Hale ordered. He turned to the tactical console, where a map of their position had just materialized. "Commander, where are the others?" The rest of the fleet was scattered across the system, each ship making its own jump to the destination. But Hale wanted to ensure they were all on track. Hayes quickly input the coordinates, and the results appeared on the display. The ships had arrived at the Kalor expanse as planned, but what they hadn't anticipated was the growing disturbance on the edges of the system. Disturbance wasn't quite the right word. It was more like an intrusion. A slow and methodical pressure was building in the vacuum around them. "Something's off, Admiral," Hayes said, her brow furrowed as she scanned the data. "We're not alone out here." Hale felt a chill run down his spine, his instincts sharpening at the thought of something, or someone, waiting just beyond their reach. The Kalor expanse had been chosen for its remoteness, for its relative isolation from the bustling sectors of galactic power. The fact that this place, chosen for its safety, was now showing signs of an unknown presence was concerning. He stood for a long moment, staring at the view screen, as if expecting the void outside to reveal its secrets. The silence was thick, oppressive. Then the comms crackled to life. "Admiral Hale, this is the Raven. We've just come out of FTL," came the voice of Captain Roland Hayes, one of the fleet's trusted commanders. "There's an anomaly just outside the system. We're picking up massive gravitational fluctuations. We're not sure what we're dealing with yet, but it's unlike anything we've seen before." The message hung in the air. The same unease that had settled over Hale now spread to the entire fleet. They were no longer alone, and the stakes had just been raised. The unknown presence outside the system could be anyone, or anything. "Understood, Captain," Hale said, his voice steady but urgent. "Deploy probes and initiate a deeper scan. Let's figure out what's out there. All fleet ships, prepare for any eventuality." But before the orders could even be fully transmitted, the unexpected happened. A massive gravitational shift rattled the fleet. The Eclipse and the other ships lurched, as if a great hand had reached out to crush them. The view outside the windows warped and twisted as the stars themselves began to ripple. "Commander, what the hell is happening?" Hale demanded, his voice rising. Hayes's fingers flew over the controls, her face pale with concentration. "It's not a natural anomaly," she said, barely able to keep her voice from cracking. "Someone, is manipulating gravity on a scale we've never seen." The very fabric of space itself was bending. There was a force at work here, one far greater than anything Earth's scientists had encountered. The fleet was under attack, but it wasn't by any conventional weapon. It was as if the universe itself was being bent to accommodate a new foreign presence. A threat, something that had been lurking in the shadows, was now revealing itself in full force. And then it appeared. A massive ship, a leviathan that dwarfed even the Eclipse. Its form was unlike anything humanity had ever designed, built with technology that seemed to exist beyond the very bounds of physics. It was not made of metal or matter in the way that human ships were. Its surface rippled with strange energy, a living, shifting mass of power that flickered with strange lights, as if the ship itself was an extension of the very space around it. The force of its presence alone was enough to distort the fabric of space-time around it. "This is impossible," Hale breathed, his eyes wide as the sheer scale of the ship came into view. It was not like anything humanity had ever conceived, not in their wildest science fiction fantasies. "Who the hell are they?" The ship moved with an eerie, deliberate slowness, its gravimetric pulses resonating through space. As it drew closer, a transmission broke through the static of the comms. "This is the Syrian expanse, and you have trespassed in our domain." A voice intoned, cold and unfeeling, carrying the weight of millennia of power. "You are an anomaly, one we cannot allow to survive." Hale's mind raced. The Syrians. The beings of energy who had ruled over this region of space for eons. He had heard the stories, read the legends. They were said to control the very forces of nature, bending space and time with their minds. But to face them now, to have them appear before humanity, was beyond anything he had imagined. "Sonny, I'm Admiral Jackson Hale of the Terran Fleet," Hale said, his voice steady but tinged with a note of caution. "We mean no harm. We are here to explore, to learn." "Your species has already broken the natural order," the voice of the Syrian representative continued. "You cannot defy the laws of the universe and expect no consequences. We will not allow you to destabilize everything we have built." Hale's heart sank as the implications of their words settled in. This wasn't just about territory, about resources. This was about existence itself, about the very fabric of reality being torn by humanity's mere presence. The Syrians, it seemed, had already decided that humanity was a threat too great to ignore. They would not tolerate Earth's rise. "Hale, you will leave this space now," the Syrian voice commanded, the tone final, "or face annihilation." Admiral Hale's mind raced. There was no way to reason with them, not now. Humanity had only just begun its journey into the stars, and already they were facing extinction. Their fleet, though powerful, was nowhere near a match for the ancient force standing before them. But there was no time for fear, no time for retreat. They had come too far, and humanity's place in the galaxy was at stake. "Prepare for battle," Hale ordered, his voice resolute. "We fight for our future." The silence that followed was thick with anticipation as the fleet prepared to engage in a fight unlike any humanity had faced. The Eclipse and its sister ships lined up in formation, facing the Syrians' Leviathan with every weapon ready. Humanity had taken its first step into the greater galaxy, and now it would either survive or be crushed under the weight of an ancient power that would not allow it to exist. The Syrian ship, vast and incomprehensible, loomed before the fleet, an immovable force in the blackness of space. It was as if the very laws of the universe had bowed to its presence. The Eclipse and the other ships in the fleet were dwarfed by the sheer scale of the enemy vessel. It was more than just a ship. It was an embodiment of a civilization that had mastered the forces of nature in ways that were beyond human comprehension. Admiral Hale stood at the heart of the command center, his gaze locked on the view screen, watching as the massive Syrian ship continued its slow approach. His thoughts raced. The Syrians had spoken of consequences, of the threat humanity posed to the natural order. He had no idea what that meant exactly. But one thing was clear. Humanity was facing its first true test in the galaxy, and it would either survive or fall. The crew of the Eclipse was silent, tense. They had fought in battles before, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't a skirmish over resources or territory. This was a battle for their right to exist, to be recognized as a legitimate force in the galaxy. The stakes were unimaginable. "Admiral, what's our move?" Commander Hayes's voice broke through the silence, her tone laced with anxiety but also determination. Hale took a deep breath, his mind working furiously. The Syrians were too powerful, too advanced, for direct combat to be an option. He had already considered that, but there had to be something, some way to use their superior technology to their advantage. They had to buy time to figure out what the Syrians wanted, time to prepare. They couldn't afford to engage in a battle they couldn't win. Prepare to initiate defensive measures, Hale said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "We'll hold our ground for now, but we need to buy time. I want all ships to keep their distance but maintain combat readiness. Commander Hayes, get me a direct line to the Syrian ship. Let's see if we can negotiate." Hayes nodded and quickly tapped the controls, her fingers moving with practiced speed. A holographic communication panel flickered to life, and a moment later, the face of a Syrian envoy appeared on the screen. The envoy was not a humanoid being. Instead, it appeared as a shifting, radiant figure composed of pure light. Its voice, when it spoke, was cold and detached, a tone that carried the weight of millennia of power. "Admiral Hale of the Terran fleet," the Syrian envoy said, "your presence here has disrupted the natural balance of this region. You have violated the laws of existence itself by harnessing forces that should not be tampered with. Your species is not yet prepared to wield such power." The external humans watched the battle play out before them. Hale clenched his fists, but his expression remained calm. "We didn't ask for this power," he said. "We didn't know we were disturbing anything. We're explorers. We're seeking knowledge, not war. We've only just begun to understand the universe. And we didn't know that our actions would have such consequences." As Syrian envoy's form flickered with light, as if it were considering his words. "The knowledge you seek is not yours to claim," it said after a long pause. "The forces you have unlocked are dangerous. You are a young species, barely out of your cradle, and yet you have disrupted the very fabric of the galaxy. You have made a grievous mistake." Hale's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, his voice hardening. "I understand the gravity of the situation, but I will not allow humanity to be destroyed for something we didn't even know was a threat. You may be ancient, but we have our own right to exist. We have our own destiny to forge." The Syrian envoy's voice grew colder, and Hale could feel the weight of its presence pressing in on him. "Your existence was not meant to be. If you continue down this path, the consequences will be irreversible. You are no longer welcome in this part of the galaxy." Before Hale could respond, the communication line cut off abruptly. The envoy's final words echoed in his mind. "You are no longer welcome." It was a declaration, a verdict. They had judged humanity, and the sentence had been passed. The Syrians would not allow them to continue. "Admiral, they've cut the transmission," Hayes reported. "What do we do now?" Hale's eyes were hard, his face set in a grim expression. He had hoped for a peaceful resolution, but that had been foolish. The Syrians had already made up their minds. Now they would face the consequences. "We prepare for war," Hale said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "Commander, initiate evasive maneuvers. All ships prepare to activate their Phoenix engines and be ready to jump at a moment's notice. We're not going down without a fight." The crew moved with practiced efficiency as they readied themselves for what was to come. Hale's mind raced. They had no choice but to engage. The Syrians were not going to negotiate. They were too powerful, too entrenched in their belief that humanity had no place in the galaxy. But Hale refused to give up. Humanity had fought for survival before, and they would do it again. The Syrian ship moved closer, its gravitational pulses shaking the Eclipse and the rest of the fleet. The stars around them warped, as if the very fabric of space was bending under the pressure of its approach. Hale could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The tension was unbearable. His feet— "Admiral, the Syrian ship is charging up," Hayes said, her voice tinged with alarm. "It's preparing to fire." The screen in front of them flashed with a series of rapidly escalating energy signatures. The Syrian ship's energy systems were gearing up, and the tension in the air was palpable. A low hum reverberated through the Eclipse, the hull vibrating with the energy building within the enemy ship. Hale's voice was calm but firm. "Evasive maneuvers. Now." The fleet split into separate formations, each ship moving swiftly to avoid the incoming fire. The Eclipse twisted and turned, its Phoenix engine flaring as it shot away from the Syrian ship. The void around them distorted as the Phoenix engine activated, sending the ship hurtling through space at a speed that no conventional vessel could match. But even with the immense speed granted by the Phoenix engine, the Syrian ship was not far behind. It moved with a terrifying precision, its weapons firing in quick succession, the bolts of energy streaking through space. The fleet's ships dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding the deadly blasts. But it was clear that the Syrians were holding back. This was not a full assault yet. They were testing humanity's resolve, pushing them to see how far they were willing to go. "We need to buy more time," Hale muttered, his eyes flicking over the battle tactics that Hayes was displaying on her console. "Commander, set a course for the nearby nebula. We can use it as cover." Hayes nodded. "Course plotted, Admiral. Preparing to jump in 3, 2, 1. Habit the Eclipse." And the fleet's ships surged forward, their Phoenix engines flaring brightly as they entered the nebula. The dense gas clouds and energetic storms within it created a chaotic environment, one that would obscure their movements and make targeting difficult for the Syrians. The nebula was a perfect place to regroup and assess their situation. As the ships entered the nebula, Hale took a deep breath, allowing himself a moment of relief. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were safe. At least for now. The Syrians couldn't follow them immediately, not without a full understanding of the terrain. But it was only a temporary reprieve. The Syrians would regroup, and when they did, they would be ready for humanity's next move. Hale turned to Hayes. "Send a message to all ships. Tell them to hold their positions. We need to figure out what we're dealing with. We're not just facing a military threat, we're facing an existential one." Hayes quickly relayed the order, and soon the fleet came to a slow halt within the nebula. The ships hovered, their engines idling as they waited for their next orders. The nebula's swirling gases and the soft glow of distant stars were a strange contrast to the tense atmosphere on the command deck. Hale felt the weight of every decision pressing down on him. This was not just about winning a battle, this was about humanity's future. As the crew worked to stabilize the ships and prepare for the next stage of the conflict, Hale couldn't help but reflect on the larger picture. The Syrians were not the only threat out there. The Zygoths and the Vrikas, both powerful factions, had been monitoring humanity's rise for some time. They would not remain passive forever. Humanity had taken its first step into the galaxy, and in doing so, it had sparked a chain reaction that could either lead to their ultimate survival or their annihilation. The stakes had never been higher. "Admiral," Hayes said, breaking Hale's thoughts. "Incoming transmission. It's from the Syrian expanse." Hale braced himself. It was time to face the consequences. He nodded to Hayes. "Put it through." The holographic projection of the Syrian envoy reappeared, its form shifting and glowing with a menacing intensity. "Let's see this straight." "You have made your choice, Admiral Hale," the envoy said. "You will pay the price for your arrogance." The Syrian fleet moved into position, ready to end humanity's brief moment of glory.